And so we would get on our ponies bareback. We were told if we rode bareback, we were safe because we wouldn't get hung up. And we would be out all day long for hours until long after dark when we eventually showed up for meals. And I don't know how my mother put up with that. But in this growing up as a feral child, because I think that's what we would call it in the truest sense of the word, I learned relationship. I learned a seat, and I do believe the seat, that interface between ourselves and our horse is probably one of the greatest, most underutilized modes of communication that we have if we want to be riders. It isn't about what we know about our hands, about our leg position, about the quality of our 20-meter circle. It's about what's going on between our horse and ourselves, where we meet, and I believe it's our seat. And I learned that in the bush, riding 20, 30 miles at a time as a small child.
Hi, Mita here. Welcome to this episode of Changing Rein, which is the first episode of season 2. There's been a lot of discord and debate and maybe people talking at cross purposes in the horse world lately. And Karen and I felt that this episode might be an antidote to all of that. Our guest is Lee McLean. In my mind, I think of her as the Alberta cowgirl. She grew up, she describes it herself, as a semi-feral child, riding her pony bareback across the prairies of British Columbia. With her husband Mike, she runs Keystone Equine. She competes, she learns, she teaches, she matches horses to riders. She's got a really, really wonderful philosophy of what a life with horses should be and can be. And I think you'll really, really enjoy this episode.
Thank you so much for joining us on Changing Rein. So one of the things that I was keen to ask you about, Lee, was on your Facebook page, you talk a bit about troubled horses and retraining them and finding them new homes. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach to horses that other people find hard to live with?
I'll try. I'm going to start by saying that I'm not always successful. And I'm really open about that on Facebook, because sometimes when we follow people online, they are so talented. Their horses are so talented. They make it look easy. And for the ordinary person, life isn't that cut and dried. And so I will say that sometimes I fail miserably. I cry my little tears and I put my chin up and I try again. I began with problem horses because they were usually inexpensive to purchase for my program. I am of Scottish heritage, so if I can find a bargain, it turns my head and I dig in. Very often, though, the horses have shown me that without an idea of time limit, without an idea of competition goals, deadlines, pure disciplines where people are really funneling a horse into one direction. Without all of that, so many horses really, really bloom if we treat them as individuals, put on lots of time and mileage, teach them that making mistakes isn't the end of the world. And so my horse program is very like how most of us would raise children.
I love that analogy of children, Lee, because it's an approach that I've talked about a lot with my dealings with horses as well. So I find that interesting that we have that in common. And I like to sort of think of a good approach with horses is a little bit like a parent. So you have their best interests at heart, and sometimes you have to do the hard things, but ultimately your goal is to see them succeed. So I think that's really interesting that we share that approach. I'm curious, you mentioned about not always succeeding. I've definitely had a few horses that I haven't succeeded with, and one of the challenges that I've had has been veterinary problems. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about your experience of veterinary problems and the relationship of that with horses that are hard to live with.
When I look back, I came from a really sort of hard-bitten traditional school, and it was mostly what they needed was more riding, more riding, more riding, and you'll eventually get where you want to go. And I don't even mean beating them up or making them know who's boss or anything. Just mileage would get you where you needed to go. And a lot of times that had a fairly good result, but for most of my life, and this is going to be very hard for some of your listeners to believe, and certainly Maida, we didn't do teeth. We didn't do chiropractic work or body work or we didn't do those things. I'm so ashamed now. We treated them like sports cars, if they had their oil changed and if they were, given a good run and kept in condition, they wouldn't let you down. And so I have to say that for many, many years our horses did not let us down. But how much more kind it would have been, what might have they accomplished if they had had all of these needs seen to. And where I live, for how horse-centric my society is right in my area in Western Canada, I'm surprised that these things have been so slow to catch on. So getting the teeth done was a big one. We always thought, oh, that horse is just fussy. That horse is a busy mouth. And we, kind of turned a blind eye to that. Maybe certain horses were cinchy. They would maybe, have a little episode after they were saddled. You have to be very careful with him. Don't cinch him tightly. Now I know that he probably had ulcers. So a lot of my horsemanship, Karen, is tinged with regret. I will say that right off the bat. I'm trying to be so much more in tune with what that horse is telling me. I do think that most troubled horses are trying to tell us something. And it might even be something as simple as the people in my life have not heard me and they've rushed me or they've handled me wrong or they've rewarded the wrong things. They're not really speaking in riddles. People often say to me, oh, if only they could talk. Well, they can. They can. And so my riding, my horsemanship still now is to put my very short temper, my always wanting to push things along, prove myself or whatever, has been slow to change. Now I'm always going, why is this horse telling me this? What's the problem? Do we need this approach or this approach? So it's stealing, it's cabbaging little ideas from all the many people who have mentored me. Yeah.
Lee, you mentioned about your horsemanship being tinged a little bit with regret or with remorse. I can certainly relate to that. And I feel like maybe that is one of the barriers for people to change, is because sometimes facing up to things that, you might have done with all of the best intentions in the world in the past, and looking back and thinking, oh gosh, why did I do that? Or why didn't I do that? Might be a bit of a barrier. I'm just wondering, are you able to tell us a little bit about your journey in that as you were going through that very sort of utilitarian approach to horsemanship to perhaps a more horse-centric approach?
I would love to. I'll start out by saying that I'm 60 years old. I have been riding since earliest memory. I have been mentored by a hugely wide array of people. So I think one of my first mentors was a chuck wagon driver, which is racing with carriages with four horses around a track. Okay, it is wild and crazy and full of accidents and death and misadventure and everything. And he is my first memory of how to deal with horses. And I did learn some things with him about learning to problem solve myself, learning to stay safe, learning to have some courage, not to doubt myself. But then I've had to go, okay, enough of that, because there were some things about how he handled horses, what I saw, that I've had to let go. I actually took a letter that he'd written me once and read it and burned it. And I watched that go up in flame, and it was a strangely healing ritual for me. So I'm all open to these things about our memories of the past, and the sort of read we get in a room in our own lives and with the people and the horses around us, as well as to being really practical. My sister and I grew up in the interior of British Columbia, which is what's called bush country. There's wild animals, there's bears, there's cougars. This was long before phones in pockets or helicopter moms. And so we would get on our ponies bareback. We were told if we rode bareback, we were safe because we wouldn't get hung up. And we would be out all day long for hours until long after dark, when we eventually showed up for meals. And I don't know how my mother put up with that. But in this growing up as a feral child, because I think that's what we would call it in the truest sense of the word, I learned relationship. I learned a seat, and I do believe the seat, that interface between ourselves and our horse, is probably one of the greatest, most underutilized modes of communication that we have if we want to be riders. It isn't about what we know about our hands, about our leg position, about the quality of our 20-meter circle. It's about what's going on between our horse and ourself, where we meet, and I believe it's our seat. And I learned that in the bush, riding 20, 30 miles at a time as a small child. And so we would get on our ponies bareback. We were told if we rode bareback, we were safe because we wouldn't get hung up. And we would be out all day long for hours until long after dark, when we eventually showed up for meals. And I don't know how my mother put up with that. But in this growing up as a feral child, because I think that's what we would call it in the truest sense of the word, I learned relationship. I learned a seat, and I do believe the seat, that interface between ourselves and our horse, is probably one of the greatest, most underutilized modes of communication that we have if we want to be riders. It isn't about what we know about our hands, about our leg position, about the quality of our 20-meter circle. It's about what's going on between our horse and ourself, where we meet, and I believe it's our seat. And I learned that in the bush, riding 20, 30 miles at a time as a small child. So we went on showing ponies, competing in pony hunters. I did learn to ride side saddle by a mentor at this time, so that's why that stayed with me all my life. But I, at age 14, went and apprenticed with a German dressage teacher who was a household name with the greats all around the globe. And I don't speak about her a lot because she was a war survivor with war crimes dealt with her, what she had observed in Germany during the Second War. And I know now that she came from a time where there was no counseling or help for that Karen. And so bottom line is, she was cruel to me. She was very hard on me. I lived with her. With a lot of stuff that it's taken me a long time to work through. But when I speak now, when I write now, it is her voice I am hearing in my ear, because she was something else when it came to horses. She was far and away ahead of her time. The empathy that she was missing with her students and with other people, all went into her horsemanship. So it was a lovely, rich opportunity for learning for me, but it's also showed me that if we want to call ourselves truly evolved horsewomen, we have to also work on our relationship with ourselves and with other people. I have a huge red flag that comes up with me whenever I see people telling me that I love horses, I work at my riding, my horsemanship, but I don't like people. Because I come from that scene, and there is a little blackness at the heart of that. There's a problem that needs helping and dealing with. So when I was a young woman, I did leave her under sort of bad circumstances, and just as I was getting a ticket to go to Germany to ride in the 9-door school, which was a huge opportunity for me. I turned my back on that, and I married my cowboy, and I went and moved to a ranch, quite isolated, raised my children, had a stroke at age 42, got over that, and through it all, the constant was horses, training horses, helping horses, selling horses, which is a whole other thing. So I am by trade a horse dealer, which is kind of like a drug dealer, not much better, but that's what I am. And that's kind of my story.
Wow, that's some story. That is just so much in there. Um, yeah, I can empathize. We have a stud farm and we're commercial horse breeders, so I suppose we're probably fellow drug dealers. And Karen and I often have discussions about that. I don't know if commodification is the word, but there is something about, and I think you touched on it. We're kind of selling a dream. I know we're selling a dream. I think you're probably selling a dream too.
Yes.
Um, and how to do that ethically and how to do that, with the interests of the horse at heart. It can be tricky to navigate.
It is a tricky thing to navigate. I have been in the business now, actually commercially, for over 30 years. And one thing that I realized is that if my horses were good enough to sell, then they were going to be missed, and that I had to love them wholly. I could not bring horses into my program that I was not prepared to keep forever and ever should they never sell, which weeded out a lot of bad situations. But it also meant that I wanted to make sure that they were well situated. So even now, people who are, we're getting ready for one right now who's coming from the United States to stay with us for probably the better part of a week. She will live in my house. I will get to know her, and she me. We will be riding, working with this animal for the coming week, and no pressure. My horses are all guaranteed, which is unusual in the industry, for a year after purchase. So once they have had their pre-purchase exam with the veterinarian of the buyer's choice, we have both copies of that. The animal is guaranteed to work for a year after purchase. And so I am supporting the buyer. They are very often coming to me for lessons or video lessons or whatnot, because it matters terribly when we create this village with the horse at the center, that he succeed. And it's unusual in the industry, but it has worked, by golly. It's made repeat customers for me. My clients become my friends, and yes, about the only thing we haven't been able to solve yet is that horses, just like dogs, don't live long enough, right? That's the one thing we haven't been able to to really influence too terribly yet, but we certainly do our best. And in my lifetime, I have seen horses still enjoying their work at age 30. When I was young, a 12-year-old horse was, ready to be turned out to pasture, sort of thing. Would you agree, Meta, that part of our horsemanship has increased so much?
Well, can I applaud my veterinary colleagues and say that advances in veterinary science have been absolutely amazing over my lifetime. I qualified in 1983, and when I think back at what we were able to do then and what we're able to do now, it's just it's a totally different universe. One of the things you touched on in because I've been reading some of your blogs and your Facebook posts, and you talk a little bit about matching the rider to the horse, that riders need to be honest with themselves. And I'm wondering, does that become a problem? How do you match these potential purchasers to the horses that you have, or how do you deal with if that person arrives and it turns out that actually they are not suited? How do you deal with that situation?
We talk about it. Because getting honest with ourselves, I think, is one huge hurdle to fairness with our horsemanship, with our horses. And as I travel around, I am also a traveling clinician, and I do have quite a few students, and I'm also a horse show judge. One of the things that I applaud and I reward when I see it is the partnership between a horse and rider that have no doubt, absolutely no fear. They are so confident and comfortable with each other. And when we have not had that ever, I think it's very hard to go out there looking for it if we've never had it. And sometimes it just takes one person to say, this horse that you have or that you're looking at, I'm not seeing that as a good mix for you. I'm not seeing that. In fact, you're both needing the same thing in your partner. And when we both need the same thing, which might be confidence, sort of a stoicism or leadership or a sense of humor, whatever it is, we very often have to match ourselves with someone who's a little different than we are, essentially, in order to get that perfect mix. And so I have sent people home with a children's pony, if they're the right size for each other. They came for the thoroughbred. And they went home with the Welsh cob. Right? And ultimately, if they're open-minded and have a sense of adventure about this, once they get in the saddle on the horse that really is going to fit them, it's like coming home. And you don't actually have to talk them into it. But getting people to try that. And if I was to think about it, the question I am asked most in podcasts and writing about and helping people is fear. There are a lot of us riding afraid.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about fear, Lee, because I for a little time ran a very tiny little riding school, and mostly for children, but I had an occasional adult come along. And sometimes a child would arrive and they would be so excited to come and learn how to ride and meet the ponies and everything else associated with coming for a riding lesson. But I would also notice sometimes you'd get a child that was really frightened, even though they were so super enthusiastic and really wanted to do it. So how do you think fear impacts on people who are keen to ride and want to participate in equestrian sport?
Fear is a funny thing because even from birth, some of us are very bold by nature, and some of us are very cautious by nature. It's the curious, cautious sort of balance. If we're fortunate, if we're really lucky and born under a lucky star, we have a real balance of curiosity and caution. That means that we know how to stay safe, but we still want to live life in a large way and take chances and do the fun stuff. It's the same with horses. It's the same with people. when we're dealing with a child, for me, if that child has never been in an accident, been, reason to or observed one or whatnot, then that's a very precious thing. And so I'm really, really careful to make sure that that child is on an absolutely honorable, well-schooled pony. It gets more difficult as we age, because as we age, our caution increases, because we have seen things. We have seen things that go wrong. And I don't know what part of our brains or how they're wired, but very often observing an accident has greater consequences to our courage than actually being in one. I was very surprised myself. I've always been sort of a gutsy, gung-ho, bootstrap rider. When I was coming back from my stroke, I was so scared. I was scared to drive. I was scared I was going to choke on my food. I was scared of the horses. Suddenly my life just took this 180, and everything was prefaced with a what if. And so teaching adults, supplying horses for adults, and the horse industry is now largely middle-aged women, very often with experiences that are hard to come back from. I think that nowadays we're much more open about fear than we used to be in the past. Everybody loved to quote John Wayne, fear is being afraid and saddling up anyway. And, I'm just like, I'm so over that. Because I think being through my own sickness and the fear that came after it made me a more empathetic teacher. And it made me realize that we cannot just breathe our way past fear or get over it or whatever. We very often have to do some soul searching, some counseling, maybe some PTSD therapy, and very often finding a horse that's more suited to where we are at now and not where we used to be.
Do you think, Lee, that there's a relationship between fear and gear?
Fear and gear? Like GEAR?
Yeah. So, yeah, as in people using harsh bits and tie downs and various bits of equipment that maybe make them feel like they have more control of the horse. Do you think there's a relationship there?
Perhaps. I know that in the world that I come from, the better schooled our horses are, the more they wear what we would consider harsher bits. So it's in the traditional cow horse training where I come from. It's only the very finest horses at the top of the triangle that get to wear particular gear. So I watch that. I know that, for instance, I'm starting a young horse now that likes to buck a little bit, despite all the groundwork and relationship and everything else. She's kind of a party girl, and she likes to have fun, and every now and then that's her it's like those of us who go woohoo, it's she just does some bucking. And I'm not going to ride her with a neck rope. So that would be my caution, aka fear, saying, no, I need to be able to pull her head up and get turned around if necessary. So perhaps there is to that. I think one of the things that we're having to fight with right now when it comes to gear and discipline is, when we were younger, we had books and whatnot that we could read and sit with slowly and soak. Nowadays, my news feed, my social media is full of people who ride hard, ride fast, demand perfection. They're winning awards. They're competing at the top of their sport and everything. And it's all very results based. And my idea of, because dressage is in a hot seat right now. So let's talk about dressage. I always thought that dressage with a little d was meant to improve the well-being of your horse and my horse, and that if we trundled along as best we could, shaping and stretching and strengthening and taking our time, that we would improve that horse. And now I'm seeing horses that don't look comfortable. I'm learning about things like universal facial pain signals and whatnot. I'm seeing unevenness in their stride, a lot of tail swishing, hollowness of the back, all sorts of things. But that's big D dressage. And I don't want to paint a big picture, because there are certainly some wonderful, wonderful examples if we want to look for them. But there is this feeling, and it doesn't matter which sport it is if we have the right stuff and go hard and don't give up, we can get there. And I'm starting to see the hollowness in that for most of us.
So what you're saying is maybe it shouldn't always be about the ribbons and the rosettes and the medals. That there's another way, and maybe the fun is has disappeared.
In my world, horses are in danger of becoming lifestyles of the rich and famous. When a paddock to house the family pony is going to cost, $500,000 in the house and the barn and the lessons, and I'm starting to realize that it is not within the realm of so many of us, and because it's become almost an elite thing in many ways. Some of our youth groups and whatnot and pony club are still trying desperately to hang on, and they're still teaching the ideals of horsemanship, and I hope they can for so many years. But definitely in North America, we are turning into a real competition, heavy interest with horses. That's where the money is. and the money isn't always with feel good. And perhaps it takes us a lifetime to circle all the way around, to try all those different disciplines, to go after those trophies, to give our kick at it, to go back to the way we were when we were kids, when we just loved horses, spending time with them. And I think that's the beauty of aging, actually. I see more and more of us who've made our way all the way around, and we're almost exactly back where we were when we began. And it feels good.
And I think I'm a similar age to you, Lee, and I'm just thinking about the whole thing about health, and you're as you age, you get more creaky and things go wrong. And does that impact your bravery as well? Quite apart from what you might have experienced, whether you've been in an accident or something has happened, is there something also about your own physical frailty becoming more of an issue?
Definitely. I think the time that we spend in the saddle is only a small portion of maybe what we need to be going after with our fitness. It's becoming more and more important as I age, that I need to be doing things like walking in rough ground, so that I strengthen my awareness of when I'm slightly off balance or not, where it builds my ability to recover. I take part in an online yoga group with riders. So we're doing such thing as hip flexibility and core strength and whatnot, particularly as a lot of us are riding those really big sport bred horses. They require a certain amount of strength and fitness and flexibility to be able to ride them without, without holding them back too much. And definitely, if we cannot safely, and I see this with a lot of my friends as we age, if we can't really swing our leg over the saddle to get on and off easily, we're sitting ducks. There is a certain amount of very practical fitness and flexibility that is allied to being us, independent and safe on a horse. I have fought this for many years. Only now am I starting to go, yes,
Mm-hmm.
you too, Lee, you too.
And Karen, didn't your research show that actually the welfare of horses ridden by older people was actually better? Is that am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I did. So the research that I did here in Australia with Australian equestrians showed that, yeah, the welfare of the horses went up as the age of their rider went up, and also the safety went up as well. So that was really quite interesting. So that sort of fits with what you're telling us, Lee.
As we age, we're less prone to take risks and chances with our horses. When I was young, I galloped at solid fences and I made my horse run down the road sometimes. And I mean, I did all sorts of things that I see Maida furrowing her brow as a vet going, that stupid girl, that stupid girl. Well, so these are things that I haven't done for 30 years. So my horses, are probably better off in that
You're
regard.
forgiven.
I maybe don't ride them
It's
so
okay.
hard. But very often too, I look at the horse's mental state also with his well-being. And how many of us are worried to ride our horses hacking out, letting go of the mouth so that they're on a long rein or whatnot. And I see a lot of aging riders staying sort of firmly entrenched where they're safe in the arena or whatnot. That's very common here in North America because we're so cold in the winter. So there's a lot of getting used to riding in an enclosed place with a roof, and maybe in the spring having to go back out to expanding our horizons and riding out to the mountains and whatnot. So there's pros and cons to being a horse with an aging rider, I think. But hopefully what we lose in physicality, we gain, in our empathy or whatnot. I'm hoping.
You mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned about going out on the trail because that's definitely something I enjoy doing with my horses. But I imagine there'll be a number of people listening to the podcast who perhaps have some pretty valuable horses that maybe are like the Ferraris of the horse world. And sometimes it can be a bit scary taking those horses out on the trail, in case they get hurt or something like that, or they might just be a lot of horse to take out on the trail. I'm curious what you think about the importance of variety in what we ask our horses to do in terms of keeping them mentally well.
I think it's hugely undervalued. I think that our wellness comes from working and strengthening and stretching different muscles, different parts of our brains. I know that if I was kept inside, sitting and doing my business books all the time, never allowed to go out and plant a flower or dig in my garden or go for a walk or something, my world would be missing so much variety. It does surprise people that if they do have what I call an arena horse, a performance horse, that it is going to take them as much effort, planning, preparation, and goal setting with making that trail horse as it did to make their arena horse. We cannot just get on the horse that's competing third level in dressage and has never left the arena, because he does such beautiful work in the arena, expect him to go to the mountains or to the beach or whatnot for a lovely day, because he is out of his element and he is going to have something to say about that. And people see that and they go, my horse doesn't like to be out. No, your horse had too much change too soon. If you would start cooling him out under saddle, out near your barn, out near his turnout paddock, start just building on that. There's a phrase called the 30-foot trail ride, and you'd go a little bit, you come back, you go a little bit farther next time. But it's a sequence of steps like training. And I think a lot of people go, hacking out or trail riding is not for serious horsewomen. I have a valuable horse, and I say the partnership would grow so vastly if more experiences were shared and went beyond that little discipline that we're aiming for. I really do believe that. And if it's good enough for Charlotte and Vallegro riding down the side of the road, right? When she comes home from the Olympics, then surely it's okay for me. I have to go by their example.
Yeah, I love that idea of them coming back from the Olympics and going for a trail ride. I think that's a beautiful picture.
Lee,
Yeah, me too. Me too. So whenever anybody says that,
there was a Facebook post that I think it was probably back in early June, that Karen and I shared just because it struck a chord with both of us. It was the one where you talked about freedom at all times, that you struggle with that concept that horses kind of want us to make some decisions for them, that they don't want total choice, because then they probably wouldn't do anything we want them to do, because they just want to be out in the prairie with their friends. It really struck a chord with me, because this is something I've been trying to work out in my own head. We are talking here, I suppose, about the future of horse sport in general, and then the future of riding and that relationship that people have had with horses for millennia. And I felt, wow, this is someone who has figured that out. Could you tell us a little bit more about that train of thought, or what? I know it comes from a lifetime of working this out, but I'm really interested to see how you got there.
that post that I wrote was in response to what seems to me almost a growing wave of not forcing our wills upon our horses for our own ends. And I read and I follow a lot of that because that is something that I have veered away from many times. And so I want to invite more of that, encouraging the free will of the horse into my own life. But, and there's always a but. There's my goal in my riding, in my life, and my parenting is to stay somewhere in the middle of the road. There is a deep ditch with this very much feeling, energy based horsemanship on one side, and then this very much performance based horsemanship in the other ditch. And very often they spend a lot of time kind of calling each other out. And I want to take what I think is good and lovely and workable and practical from each side, and somehow enrich my life, my horse's life, by being open to both, but not wholly throwing in with one side or the other. And I have had a number of horses and teenage boys in my life that if there isn't a guideline, boundaries, the title of my second book was called Love and Rules, because to me there's a balance in that. But if there isn't somebody saying that was, you are better than that, that is not what you are capable of, we are going to try that again, we are going to do better, if there isn't somebody saying, come now, we're going to give this another effort, very often there is a backlash with anxiety and insecurity and all sorts of dangerous behaviors, because I think all of us need to know where our boundaries are. And there's almost a feeling of ease and confidence that comes in knowing. One of the scariest things in the world is standing out on a mountaintop where the wind is rushing, there is no boundaries, nobody can hear you, nobody can see you, nobody would know if you fell. And I always have that picture with me with my horsemanship. I don't want my horses feeling as though they're going it alone. And if I'm their mother in a way, with all the good and the bad that title entails. And I don't mean that to be, something weird with my little fur child or anything. I don't mean it that way. But I can love and want what's best for somebody and still say, no, you're better than that. I, 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 I almost expect more of you. And very often when we have that approach with our dogs, with our horses, they go, oh, that's right, my mistake, here we go. And then they knock it out of the park. So yeah, it's a thing. In my life, I am surrounded with either performance-based horsemen or the ones who are strictly relational. And very often that is not riding or driving your horses or competing or anything. That's having them as companion animals. And I'm not against that. I'm not there yet. I still want my horses to have a job or do something with me. And I know that's also kind of a uncomfortable topic with many people. But yeah, that's what that was about, Maida.
You've touched on two things there that I'd love to pick up on. One is the idea of horses having a job. I just read a paper this evening about working horses, as in working equids, and about defining that term, because unless the term is properly defined, it's difficult to compare research. It's difficult to get funding. So they're defining working equids basically as being horses who work for people's livelihoods. Do you know what I mean? What they do contributes to people's livelihoods. But they talk about it. For the purpose of this paper, they talk about it being in low resource environments. So in poor countries or poor regions of richer countries. And I've often wondered about our performance horses. So in our high income countries, our performance horses, our race horses, show jumpers, high level dressage horses, who also work for a living, and whether that sort of a designation would help people. And so I'm interested the way you talk about horses having a job, where what attracts you to that concept?
Well, I'm coming at the horses with the job thing from a very practical thing because we are a ranching family where our 25 to 30 head of working horses is rotated amongst our family members, and they go out and they work for maybe 4 to 6 hours or more a day under saddle, helping gather cattle, doctor cattle, administer meds. We don't have chutes or corrals. The cattle have to be roped up, immobilized. The horse has to hold the cattle while you get off and then give it its vaccinations and whatnot. It's a very dangerous lifestyle. Our safety is directly tied to the sort of horses that we have on the job. And every ranching family I know of has family members who have died or been gravely injured when their horses made one mistake. So for me, the whole working horse thing isn't necessarily pit ponies or donkeys in third world countries or carriage horses in parks or whatnot. We have horses who work for their livelihoods. They are family members. We mourn them when it is time to say goodbye, when they age out. But Maida, you'll be interested to know, we start our ranch horses very often at 5 or 6 years of age. It is not unusual for them to still be pulling a paycheck in their mid-20s up to their 30s. Now, their work may not be quite as involved as it was when they were 10 or 12 years old. Might be shorter, not so grueling or whatnot, but they still take so much pride in being that horse that we rely on. And so I think it's important for people who doubt this to realize that horses break down into two very major groups, or that's how I see it. There are the horses who are very, very friendly. They love us dearly. They whinny with joy when we show up, and their world is somehow geared to making us happy. We could be pounding them a square peg into a round hole, and they would still try their hardest to make us happy. There is the other half of horses that are sort of aloof. They don't really care to see us unless we're showing up with food. And they're not into hugs and scratches and whatnot. And very often these horses fall through the cracks and become sort of troubled horses. And I think this goes back full circle into what we were talking about, my joy at finding horses that need my help. I see these horses that are so much more aloof, and I go, they do not know who they are. Their idea of identity and meaning in their life, they are not horses to take joy in making pretend. So the idea of a perfect circle is lost on them. But if we take that horse and we give him the opportunity to do something with us with an outward focus. So this is where the horse that is a ranch horse, a cowboy's horse, checking for cattle, riding through, roping up sick calves. Suddenly, all of a sudden, that horse goes, I am your partner. You would be a foot and next to useless without me, and you count on me to do this. And when I get to this stage with these horses, very often this can be carriage driving horses. This can be horses who field hunt, they belong to a hunt. They go out, they do something. These horses become so aligned with the job that they have been given that it almost does not matter whether they have a rider. So they would be happy to go out and do that job without anybody on their back. So this is the horse that now we can have. He is a very good horse at this. Now he takes pride in, actually, it doesn't matter who's on him. He still can be counted on to do a very fantastic job because that's who he is. And I think that these horses that are this way, there are people that are this way. They don't want to go for lunch and have really warm relationships. Very often they are people who run a company or who are invested in making a difference in the world. Do you know what I mean? They find their inner peace and who they are and their reason for being from something that's out beyond them. And so whenever anybody says to me, horses don't like to have a job, I have to say, oh, I'm sorry. I've seen something very different in my life. There are horses that want to make a difference in the world around them, just as we are.
One of the things that I like, I love your analogy about them having a job. One of the things, though, just as I guess on the flip side, is I've heard people say things like, "Oh, I work at this horrible job that I hate to pay for your hay, so I don't care if you don't like this particular job that I've given you." You can just sort of suck it up. Have you heard this kind of attitude from some riders? And what do you think if you've ever heard something like that?
Karen, I have, and I think the key word that you used there was riders. They're not horse people. They are not loving those around them. If we love our horses, then we are not going to be taking that tough love approach. We are going to be changing what we do with that horse until we find the job that he likes. And this is where we run into trouble with people that really identify with having a certain discipline. I am a dressage rider. I am a Western pleasure rider. I am in combined driving. I am. very seldom do we hear somebody say, well, I'm entirely new to distance riding, but my horse is always telling me, come on, Mom, let's make some miles. Let's get out and see the world. And so I have left my show jumping or show hunter world behind, and I am going off to do distance riding with my horse. Like, so seldom, and it would be such an easy fix to learn so many different parts of the horse world and to go, oh, I bet you that would really appeal to my horse. Let's give it a try. Let's find out where the next clinic and teacher is. Let's join the club. Let's find out about that. So much about horses and riders that are mismatched and struggling would be solved if we decided that we would put on a new hat, expand our horizons, try something new, which gets harder as we age, by the way, and go off and do with that horse. Or I happen to believe it's probably kinder to sell that horse to somebody who would do that. The horse who revels in freedom of movement and must make so many miles, if he is with a person who is uncomfortable doing anything else but walk, trot in a ring. I think it would be a kindness to find that horse, a rider, a home where that would be celebrated, and that we would go and look for the horse or pony who was actually really happy to do walk trot in the ring, because there are such horses. So yeah, I do hear what you're saying, and I do hear that, but I think it's the difference between riding and horsemanship.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention horsemanship, because another thing I picked up on on your Facebook post was this concept of the fact that 90% of your followers are women. I think our demographic actually for our listeners is more evenly split. I think we're kind of 55% female. Um, and I think you said that you worried that horsemanship might be getting lost, in that we don't have as many men involved in riding, in horse keeping, in the horse care, and the equestrianism. And I got this sense that you felt that was to the detriment of the horse world.
Yes, I do, because I think whenever we skew very hard to one side or the other, for instance, in my area, I don't know a young male veterinarian who is coming into large animal practice in my area. They're all young women, and so I worry about that, because for many reasons, Meta. I think that men look at things differently than women. So from a diagnostic point, I think they see things differently, and there's pros and cons to both. I like the blend and I like the balance, but I also worry as a mother of boys. My boys were mentored by horsemen, and they taught them patience, feelings, what it was like to say goodbye, what it was like to fail, what it was like to be gentle when it was needed. And without those men in the horse industry, who is going to mentor tomorrow's boys? Because we do see things differently. And to me, it's not a either or situation. I think it's so much better and healthier if there is a blend. I think there are horses that respond better to female energy, but I don't always believe that men are hard on horses and demanding. I have seen some very impatient women and some lovely, kind and gentle and nurturing men. So whenever I see this skewing, and I think your statistics at 55-45 female to male are actually really, really healthy and really unusual. You should be very proud of this. And I suspect it's your science-based approach, because men like facts to back up feeling, if, you know, for the most part. They want to know the why. And we women do too, but it's just something that I've noticed with the men who follow me and the men in my life who are horsemen. But I worry about it because I think that today's young men really, really do need healthy mentorship. And they might not get it from us.
I think that's so importantly, yeah, in terms of the men of the future and the role models. I used to be a teacher a high school teacher, and it was a similar concern there because so many women were in teaching, and it was for the boys. It was like their whole life they were being told what to do by women, and like you say, the men do bring a different perspective and a different approach. So I can see exactly where you're coming from, and I feel like I agree with you. I wondered if we could, because I'm conscious of the time, round out our conversation, which has been amazing. I've so loved it. If there was one thing that you could suggest to horse owners who might be listening to the podcast today, if there was one thing that you could suggest that could improve horse welfare generally, that a horse owner could implement, what would it be?
I am rationalizing all sorts of very, very good answers that might be really interesting and lovely to end this conversation. But my first thought I'm going to go with: we are told from first breath to not give up. And when it comes to horse welfare, there is a time when it is ethical and it is kind and it is oh so necessary for us to give up. And I would rather not achieve all that I could with my horse than look back and go, oh, I went on far too long. And there are a lot of horses that appear gentle and willing and kind, and they are that way because they don't feel well or they are sore. Because even if our saddle fits, even if we ride well, even if the horse is going correctly, he is not a machine. He will get sore. He will get tired. And I do see this, that sometimes when it comes to horse welfare, it is okay to say enough. And there are very few happy endings with horses, actually. My father told me that horses were heartbreak, and I poo-pooed that. And I am realizing now that even the best stories and the most happy relationships I've had with horses, there is always one sad day. And so listen to your veterinarian. If your veterinarian is saying, yes, science has given me ways that I could make your horse happy or healthy for a little while, I want you to go home and think about that and go, but is this the most dignified end for my beautiful friend? And that would be something I would say. Go with your heart, but also listen to your veterinarian. Yeah. And I'm talking to one particular person in my life right now, and I say that. Yeah.
Really, that's quite a somber way in which to wrap things up. But actually, it's something we haven't really discussed on the podcast, and it's good to hear it articulated, and good to hear it articulated by someone like you, Lee, who is obviously so empathetic, so kind, so generous, so measured. You know what I mean? You're as you say, you're in the middle of the road. You're not in the ditch on either side, and to hear you say it, I think is really, really powerful.
If I could just add to that, I had a beautiful phone call from a veterinarian who was with a large animal practice on the coast, hours away from us. But he had said, "May I write or post something, a post that you had done on the ethics of putting horses down when it's time, when we've run into a stone wall that can't be fixed, when we have a horse who is dangerous to the point of rearing over backwards on people and hurting people and everything else. It is not kind to send that horse down the road. That it is our duty to send him off into the next realm with a kind hand on his neck and a loving voice in his ear. And this veterinarian was in tears talking about this, and he said, if there is some way that we could put this out. And I said, we can put this out, because this is horsemanship too. Just as we need to worry about the quality of our feed and the grass and the turnout pens and the water and how we store it and conservation and everything else. How we say goodbye to these animals who are so noble, who we so love, who we have dedicated our careers and our lives to, is actually our horsemanship. And to skirt around that means everything else is just smoke and mirrors. And I believe this with all my heart.
What a wonderful way to end the podcast, if a somewhat somber way to end, Lee. But I thank you so much for coming on Changing Rein. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope maybe we might be able to have more conversations in the future.